Okay, the game is Tikal, or Tickle, but not Tickle Me Elmo. This is a game, my ex-wife won it. I bought it at the same time I think I bought maybe a second copy of Europa Universalis, Age of Renaissance. I got a big package of stuff through the mail order long ago at a very, there was a somewhat of a discount on the whole deal. Maybe shipping was cleared or whatever, but it was sort of our Christmas presents to one another in the pile. Just a lot of games that we both liked. Anyway, she didn't know this yet, I didn't know it yet, but she was an archaeologist, and the thematic aspect of it was exciting, and it turned out to be a game we both liked. It sort of turned into some sort of long-term classic in a lot of senses, I think, among the Euro community, but I've got this old copy, so I thought I'd cover it. I'm actually interested in Tikal too, because this was a decent enough game. Alright, let's go over what we've got, and maybe a little bit about, well, we'll go over the rules before we get started with the playing. Now, if there's other people who've done rules introductions, you want to go listen to them. Because I'm doing these as much to remind myself of the rules as to be any sort of help. I've played it, but it's been probably over a year, maybe a couple of years, and since I've last played it, and I'm going to be referring to the rule book. So why am I doing this? Well, because it's easier for me to learn the rules, and sometimes these things are of use to people. Okay, so again, what do we have? We have this hex board, base camp over here. There's a couple of starting temples. The game's going to be about excavating temples, but it's more like about building them. And then an extra space here. And this is what is going to be contained, the kind of information that's on these is what's going to be contained on these. Now, these guys are set up in alphabetical order in order to moderate the order of the temples that comes out in play. The later in the game, or the tiles that come out in play, the later in the game there's a higher predisposition for very more valuable temples, things that start out more valuable. These guys start out at level 1, but eventually you're going to be building up to level 10, and some of the temples start off quite high as their first piece, like 5 or 6, I think. I'm not sure. 5, I think, is the lowest. And that's what these are. As you excavate the temples, you're going to make them worth more and more points there. These little guys are going to be special treasures. They're going to have a little symbol on each one, and your goal is to create matches of those symbols. For the players, we have little squares, I think, for scoring. Let's get some of them. I don't know, I can't see. There's my black square. Black on black's hard to see. Okay. And anything else for the summary? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I know there's one that you have a line of scores there. And then you have this little player aid card, which is going to give you the actions that you can take and their costs, essentially. And I think it's the same on both sides. Except it's based on the number of players? Oh. We'll see. Alright. And does it tell you how you should place it or anything? Using the blue side when playing the basic version and the red side when playing the advanced. Well, of course we'll be playing the advanced version. I guess this is the blue side because it has a bluish border, and this is the red side, because otherwise they're not exactly the same. Okay. So, on your turn, you will draw a terrain tile and place it on the board. And I think you can place it anywhere. generally you want to place it, if it's useful, somewhere where you can get to it, and if it's useless, somewhere where it'll harm an opponent. But sometimes they just get thrown out in the edges of the board in weird places. And then you're going to have 10 action points to operate, and that's where this card comes in. It tells you, hey, this is 10 action points, and then for example, this will cost you 5 action points, this costs you 5, this costs you 3. We have some other opportunities though. And each person is going to take their turn flipping a tile and taking 10 actions in order to do what they want. This is a clear jungle tile. It allows you, when a tile is like that, clear like that, and that can happen to tiles that don't start out that way, allows you to build a base camp there. And a base camp is nice because it lets you bring your pieces in on the base camp. Normally you just start here. You have the temples, which we see here, and those you're going to be able to dig up. You have treasures. Now treasures are going to look rather like this, and they just mean you put one of those circles on there. And the first person to go in there is allowed to claim a treasure. It's one of these. That's swap treasure. It's got to be this, dig up a treasure. That if they spend, well, the first person to spend 3 action points at the treasure. Now once the treasure is removed and they have it in their hand, it becomes a clear jungle space, so they can put their little huts there. And then finally there's a volcano, which looks rather like this volcano. And when those are drawn, you do scoring. So scoring kind of semi-randomly placed in the deck. Remember, these are ordered, so there's a certain pattern to the play that'll happen every time. Of course, I'm not familiar with that pattern. This is almost like a first look in the sense that I forget this game every time I play it, because I only play it once every few years, like everything else. And it's got a lot of little specifics to it that you kind of do have to know. It's part of the ability of the game is how recently have you played it, because if you've forgotten, you know, when the volcanoes come up, that's a big hindrance for you. Alright, what are the little symbols on here? Well, over on the basic game we have a simpler set. It costs you 1 action point to bring a dude in, either at a tent, and you would never have a tent here, or back at the base camp. Remember, you have 10 actions, and you kind of have to count these on your fingers. It costs you actions to move over stones. Okay, so to move one little dude over 1 stone costs you 1 action point. To move one little dude over 2 stones costs you 2 action points. You can't move them over 0 stones, and some of the tiles have a significant number of little stones on them. So you're going to be adding the stones on the 2 tiles. If you have a tile with a stone and a tile without stones, you count the total number of stones. But if you have 2 tiles next to each other with no stones, well, they are impassable. It costs 2 action points to uncover a level of temple. And to do that, you just need to have a dude there, although I think you can only uncover a number of levels of temples equal to the number of dudes you have present. So you'd spend the 2 action points, and then you'd put the next level of temple up. And these get progressively smaller, sort of. Something looks weird about 5. I think it's bigger than 4. Certainly not significantly smaller, but then they get really tiny all at once. But the idea is to build a little pyramid, even if it's a misshapen one. We have already talked about recovering a treasure. That costs 3 action points if you're with the treasure. Oh, here. In a player's turn, he may uncover a maximum of 2 levels per temple. You must have an expedition member in the hexagon per layer uncovered. So you can only uncover 2, and you need 2 guys to do it. This is swapped treasures. It costs you 3 action points, and you can trade a treasure with someone else. The other player may not refuse, but you can't break up if he already has a pair or more of that treasure. And the goal is to collect pairs, so you can't just screw somebody over. That would kind of actually end up in potentially pathological situations where the game wouldn't end, because both players would be constantly just trading treasures. You can establish a camp. This costs 5, and it can only be established in a jungle or empty treasure location. Now, in order to do that, I believe you need a dude, just like you need a dude with these other digging things. So you'd have to have a guy out in, you know, the empty tile. It has to be clear. It can't have a temple in it, and it can't have a treasure still in it. And then you just spend all that points and get yourself a camp. Now the bonus to that, of course, is you can bring your guys in deeper into the game where they can explore the more valuable stuff. And then the final one is 5 points to put a cap on a temple. Once a temple is high enough, see, here's the thing. It's not the guy who digs the temple who gets the points. It's the guy who controls the most pieces there. And we'll see that in the scoring round. But once that temple gets high enough, it may well be worth putting a dude on top of it, and then it is yours forever. You will always score it during scoring rounds. We'll see how that works on the scoring, but that's a big expense, another 5. Plus it kills one of your dudes. Alright. See what we got here. When a volcano hexagon, okay, so when a volcano comes up in the tile, and I don't know what letters they're on, maybe it tells me somewhere. I think there's a couple of them in there, but I just don't know. The player who drew the volcano puts it aside, and then he scores his position, and the way you score is temples and treasures. The temple, so if you have a guard on the temple, or if you have the stronger expedition force, the more people, you'll get the full value of the temple. If 2 people are tied for that temple, or more, like this, nobody gets the points for it. You'll also get points scored for your treasures. And you get 1 point for a single treasure, 2 points for a pair, and 3 points for a pair, and 6 points for a triple. So, you know, there's some advantage to gaining the groupings, but they're not tremendously valuable there. Although points are kind of short. You mark them with these little cubes on this track, just like any other Euro. Then everybody else gets to score. I'm sorry, I cheated there. So when you draw the hexagon, you use your 10 action points as a normal turn. Then you score. And then each other player gets to use 10 bonus action points and score. When everybody's scored, the person who drew the volcano gets a normal move. He doesn't draw another hexagon, but he gets 10 more action points to explore Tikal. So you get some mobility just before you score, so it's not like the volcano's randomness isn't complete. Which is to say, you don't get bonus by just being in this perfect position when the volcano comes up usually. You have this opportunity to, you know, move your pieces around and to take advantage and take control of the valuable spaces. The person who draws it gets a slight advantage because they can charge in to a temple and score it with less pieces. So there's something kind of weird about that. It actually may be a bigger advantage than if it were just an automatic scoring at that moment. But it does allow you to use, you know, some thought to set up your pieces so you can react easier. And the game continues until the next volcano comes out. After the last hexagon is placed, each player and that player completes his action points. There's going to be a final scoring round. And just like the last ones, you get 10 moves, 10 action points, and then you score. And that goes around the board with each person. If you pass 100, you lose. No, you get something to mark that you have extra points. Okay, so now we're going to play with the advanced auction version. What does that mean? I don't know. Or are we? No, we're not going to play with that. I never play with that. Yeah, I never play with that because I'm always playing with people for the first time. So we'll just leave that alone. There's not too much difference with it, except that you're bidding on where the tiles go. That removes some of the luck of the draw from the game, but it's just not something I've ever been terribly interested in. I don't like adding mechanisms that make it harder for a game to solo, and also harder for new players to achieve. How many volcanoes are there in here? I don't know. We're going to find out. It's kind of a random thing for me. Every time I play, I forget. And of course, new players aren't going to know either. I don't think it tells me. Oh, yeah, it probably does. There are 3 total in here. I don't know exactly what letters they fall on, though. That's kind of the problem. But, you know, you have to give it a little time to develop the board. And then they're kind of interspaced between there. I don't think there's one at the very end pile. I think there's one in the pile before that. So they're fairly tight in the middle of the game, but no more than 1 per letter. All right, well, we'll get started with this, and I apologize if you were watching this just for the rules, because I'm not the person to do that for, except in games where I'm the only person who's covering it.